I am delighted to have my friend Blois Olson as a guest for an interview. Blois is a radio personality here in Minnesota. He's the publisher of a bunch of newsletters. He's a podcast host. He's the principal of Fluence Media. And Blois and I go way back. We first met through politics, started publishing what was, I think, probably the first political blog in Minnesota covering Minnesota politics. Developed a newsletter out of that. We're publishing a book at one point. I've done a lot of work together over the years. So Blois, thanks for joining us.
This is all your fault. All of it is your fault. I can trace this whole crazy social media, online content, newsletter business to Dave Erickson saying, I own a URL. Do you want to start something?
And it was 1998. The perfect year to start something. Jesse Ventura was running for governor. We had a lot to talk about. And it worked out pretty well. That was the early days of the web. We didn't have content management systems back then, but we managed. And then, we started this newsletter as a companion to the website, which was a daily roundup of the Minnesota political news.
That was like the second big thing we did was morning headlines, but there's our first newsletter was called Min Spin. I think we did it once a week.
Yep.
We did it once a week. And I remember like part of our audience was the Capitol crowd, but we had to print off the HTML newsletter onto hard paper because they didn't get HTML email in their DOS systems yet.
That's right.
And so that should just put it all into perspective of how long we've been scheming and coming up with ideas for content. There you go.
Bring those printouts to the Capitol press corps down in the basement and hand them out. And
we were the first that had graphics and photos of people as well.
That's right.
Which is ironic because now every email that I have has minimal graphics and is just basically black and white, quick read, because now we know how email servers treat those graphics. So it's an evolution.
We also started, I mean, we can argue that we had the first political podcast in Minnesota as well with what was it? Spin Cycle, and it was a collaboration between our website then, mn-politics.com, and Minnesota Public Radio. So they thought so much of our work that they thought we should do a podcast together, which is really ironic considering that they now have such a dominance in podcasts over at American Public Media and Minnesota Public Radio that we're there. And of course, it was election day 1998 when Jesse won. That became my first day on WCCO radio, which is now in its 25th year for all kinds of various roles. So again, David, I really trace this all back to you looking at me saying, I own a URL. Do you want to start something? And I said, sure. And you said, you have good information and I know how to program in HTML. Let's go. And here we are 23 years later. Yeah. I trust your math.
23 years later. Yeah. There you go.
So tell me about how you got into radio. So you have a radio show now, but you did a lot of commentating on politics. We did a lot of commentating on politics.
Yep.
So that turned into WCCO gigs. So tell me about how that happened and evolved.
Well, I was just an analyst for a number of years from 98 until 2010. And they'd pull me in now and then whenever there's breaking news, whether it was the Wellstone plane crash or election night. And then in 2010, WCCO was owned by CBS, and CBS did some buyouts, which of course we know many media companies have done. And in April of 2010, I started Morning Take. You and I had left the political publishing business. We'd focused on our consulting practices. We'd merged our companies into a firm you're back with now, Tunheim. And I kind of missed the political game. I was doing some writing, but I read there was a moment in April of 2010 when you just kind of get inspired when we come up with these ideas. And I got inspired by Politico's playbook. And it was the idea that everybody read it before they got out of bed or got into the shower every day in Washington. And I said, well, I think that's good. That's more than political headlines, which we had already done and sold and gotten rid of. I said, so there's some dots to be connected. And so without telling literally anyone in the world, I woke up on a Monday morning and put together, I think it's like 13 bullet points about a Democratic convention the weekend before and some other dynamics in the 2010 governor's race. And I think I sent it to between like 50 and 80 people out of my normal Exchange server. And I remember distinctly being like, all right, what am I going to call this? Like, it's done. And I remember just like date, and Morning Take. Like Blois's Morning Take. I didn't say Blois's Morning Take, but that's what it was. And it grew to about 500 subscribers in like 3 or 4 weeks. And by August of that year, we had to open mail accounts and server accounts. And now it's a daily audience of over 15,000 people across a lot of things. So I always say this is that like I keep trying stuff, and when it stops working, I'll stop trying. But it's just the spaghetti test. If you throw a bunch of stuff against the wall, some of it's going to stick, and that stuck. And that then led to Morning Take Radio on WCCO at 6:20 every day. And the premise was, well, you're awake anyways, because people who know me know that I don't sleep a lot and I'm an early riser. And so it just kind of grew and frankly fueled kind of what I say is another new revolution in media, which was the fall of newspapers, the rise of whatever wave of social media that was. And you and I along had an agreement that you could take all the social media channels in the world, but if you could own the inbox, if you could find real estate in the inbox of email, that was still the most powerful thing. And I still think that's true today.
Yeah. So I want to take a step back and kind of describe Morning Take for people who are not familiar with it. It is the morning read on what's happening in Minnesota politics. It is a compilation of the headlines, the committee assigned the committees that are happening that day. It's
meant to be a preview of the day. The original premise was that you're smarter before breakfast. So if you're in politics in Minnesota and you have a business breakfast or you have a conference call or you have an early meeting, you're smarter for that meeting. And then it grew into kind of a view of the day ahead. So much of media is what's happened. And especially, hold on, we have some breaking news in the Fluence newsroom right now. One sec. Governor Walz has just called a curfew and we are about to put out an extra. So my managing editor, Mike Maybay, was waiting for me. So here we go. All right. So that's how this operation works. No, so the idea was so much of news is like what happened, and cable news especially, and talk radio is so much about why did that happen, what did it happen, that there's nobody telling you like what's gonna happen. And that was the premise of Morning Take. What's gonna happen? And so, our goal is 2 to 3 days a week, we tell you something before anyone else does about politics in Minnesota. And that was the premise. It's grown from about a page to about 5 pages. And we link back to the media. So that's the other thing, is that we don't take their content. It's clearly curated, and we drive traffic to their websites, which is one of the reasons why I think they don't mind us curating their stuff.
hmm You've got what I think is a brilliant but simple and elegant way to get people to scroll all the way down to the bottom of your newsletter every day. So can you tell me about that and how that came about?
We publish birthdays, and everybody likes to be noted on their birthday. And this is not an original idea. This was from that was from Playbook. They had birthdays, and early on, I was at a social event, and there was these three couples. We were all having this conversation, and the wives were like, "Kill the birthdays. It doesn't matter." And the guys were like, "No." Pretty some big hitters in Minnesota politics. The husbands were like, "No, that's my favorite part. It allows me to call so-and-so on the way into the office and say happy birthday." And they think and so that whole concept lives on today. We have people who send us their birthday. We have people who are mad when their birthday is not in there, or if they were on one year and they fall off the list. The truth is there's not a lot of rhyme or reason other than people I know who are in my calendar or in my Facebook feed that fit Minnesota politics. We have a Wisconsin product, and I've done a few birthdays there. And then it's like, how did you know? What did you know? And the truth is most elected officials' birthdays are public records, so you can find it. But yeah, no, it makes people scroll to the bottom. Our open rates are, steadily higher than national average. And frankly, in the last year, since the beginning of the pandemic, our open rates have risen even more. And, I'm just grateful people continue to find the information valuable.
So why do you think why are your open rates increasing during the pandemic?
Well, never before have more people looked to the government for information, I think. And we were fortunate. We're usually the first out of the gate in the morning. People have tried to compete and get out before us, but then I just wake up a half hour earlier and get it out early.
Gotta get up pretty early in the morning.
A lot of the major players have given up trying to compete at 6:30 or 7 a.m. And so they go at 9 or 10. And so through the pandemic, there was always this, when is something going to happen? When are vaccines going to be available? When is a curfew going to be lifted or put into place? And normal people, and I talk about them as my neighbors. Like, my neighbors didn't necessarily even know who the governor of the state of Minnesota was necessarily, but then they started to watch these briefings and they cared what he was going to say. And then they wanted to know when golf courses open, when, restaurants could reopen, when bars could reopen. And we generally, at least 90% of the time, had that information first. And so there became a formula, and people just kept subscribing and opening and subscribing and opening. And I thought there'd be some fall off, like as vaccines came off, and the truth is we haven't. We've still, I think we added, we average in a normal year, we average 25 to 30 subscribers a week. Last year we averaged about 60 to 80 subscribers a week. And this year we're holding steady at 40 to 50 new subscribers per week. Now we have some attrition and people change jobs but on average, we're still growing after 11 years.
Yeah. So Morning Take is your flagship. It's the first one. You have a bunch of other ones. So what was the next one?
So the next one was Business Take. We surveyed our readers. They wanted a business newsletter, but there's a lot of business news. And so I thought, what can we do differently? Well, there's a lot of big corporations in Minnesota that do a lot of things around the country that people don't cover here, or it's later, whether it's the ad industry and big national accounts, or it's Cargill, a global company that, once in a while they'll get covered in the Star Tribune, but frankly, it was usually bad news. And so like for instance, we learned that Cargill made major investments in the cocoa or coffee world. And so cocoa and chocolate and coffee. So they made some major plays in that as a commodity. And we would pick up this news from all over the world. And people in Minnesota were like, oh, Cargill's into chocolate and coffee. Who wouldn't be? We learned that, when a brewery would put out a beer on social media and we put it in Friday, that it got a lot of clicks. And so we drove Business Take. And then we added Ag Take, focused on agriculture. And that was where data began to really inform our growth. We found that our best subscribers, people of elected officials, CEOs, were clicking on ag content in Morning Take and Business Take at a higher rate than other stories. And that was because there was this void or vacuum, yet ag is a huge part of our statewide economy. And so we had a conversation and somebody's like, yeah, we've tried to do that. It doesn't work, but we'll sponsor it if you want to do Ag Take. And so you're going to sponsor it. We're going to do a newsletter. And so I think that's about 8 years old now, maybe 9. And then we've added Minneapolis Take this year, Wisconsin, Minnesota Good News we added during the pandemic about philanthropy and good stories, because frankly, people needed some good news. And then Health Take is, I think, 5 or 6 years old, because healthcare is, again, a huge part of what people think about. But we've been able to find sponsor partners for most of those newsletters, which, makes the cost of innovation really inexpensive.
Sure. So you've had impressive growth, impressive staying power. It takes a lot of work to put together a daily newsletter or a weekly newsletter, let alone a daily newsletter. So you mentioned sponsors. Does the sponsor come first before you decide to start a newsletter? Or?
No, not necessarily. We started Minneapolis Take this year because it's a decisive year in the future of the city. And there's a lot of news in Minnesota's largest city. So we don't have a sponsor there yet. We have some interest and we have some growth. So now we can look a little deeper to say, oh, okay, maybe there's some numbers here that somebody might want to sponsor. But we remain in control of editorial coverage of every newsletter. And that's clear in all of our sponsor agreements. We won't sponsor with people we don't think align with the audience necessarily. We've gotten some pushback on some of our sponsors, but the point is that, let's just say it's an environmental issue. We don't have any clients in that space, so we can take sponsors on all sides of that. So, it's really about what the audience opens and clicks on and engages with that drives what we're trying to do here. And again, our audience is thought leaders, elected official, other media. And in each case, we try to be simple of here's what's coming, or here's what you need to know to be smarter in your industry. And not kind of regurgitate everything that's already happened. So here are the events that are coming. Here's, a news conference that's 3 days from now, because so many people get home because of social media and online news. People get home from work. They don't watch the 6 o'clock news anymore. They know what happened. Yeah. And so we started a Chauvin trial briefing, which will go away as soon as the Chauvin trial is over. But that was because people are glued to their stream, but they may have a meeting. They may have right. And some people just can't be, connected to it. And so it's basically what happened today and what's going to happen in the Chauvin trial. And we put it out and we had 850 subscribers in 6 days. And I think part of it is they know it's going to go away too. Yeah. Right. But they want to be smarter, or they want a little information, and people remain just hungry for information. And the more crowded channels get, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever, again, if we find real estate in their inbox that they find valuable, they're going to keep opening it.
Yeah. Well, that was a very smart and nimble move you made by doing that. Probably a lot of stuff that you were already collecting for other newsletters. So you probably weren't going to expend a lot more extra effort to publish it. But yeah, I thought there was and I didn't see anything except notice it in one of your newsletters, and that's how I started subscribing. So
well, that's the other thing. And we've worked together on trying to get more subscribers and a good interface there. But I also have to give a shout out. I mean, this started as just me doing Morning Take, but there's been various people, and Mike Maybay deserves a lot of credit for the last, 4 or 5 years as kind of being the managing editor. And one of the things that I laugh about is people are like, how do you do all this? And da 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 da. And I'm not shy. There's people who make me look smarter than I am every day through these newsletters and through content. And you've filled in that role too. And so you understand that there's a judicious way of trying to be smart when there's so much competition for smart content.
Yeah. So what are the biggest lessons you've learned from all this, these many years of growing successful newsletters?
Try stuff, because the cost of innovation in this world, online content, whether it's blogs or podcasts or newsletters or Facebook groups or whatever, is really cheap. Like, we don't need to, I'll just take a recent example. Like, I don't need 100 scientists trying to figure out a vaccine and to try to innovate, or a new drug. We try some stuff and we can tell really quickly, people will let us know, or they just don't sign up, or they don't listen. And so we just watch the numbers. Like, for instance, we just did a series on the, a series of podcasts with mayor candidates in Minneapolis. Obviously, Minneapolis is front and center for a lot of our political audience. And some people don't even know who these people are, but so many people from our current audience are curious about these people that we had record downloads on podcasts with mayoral candidates that nobody had heard of. So much so that the WCCO analytics people are like, what did you do different this time? And I'm like, we just put out there what we think people are curious about. Now, we've had the governor on, we've had senators, we've had representatives, on Beers with Blois podcast, and the mayor one took off like 4,000 new downloads in the first 3 days. And you're like, and that, and so you're like, well, I guess there's people who want to listen, so we might as well keep feeding them. And again, that cost, I mean, we have sponsors of the podcast, but the cost of doing that is minimal compared to inventing a new drug, designing a new car, whatever it is that people try to innovate with in business. And that's what we're trying to do here, is show, like, we have the audience. Our intellectual property is our audience and our method of delivering it, and just knowing behind the scenes what people are hungry for and what the data is. So.
How long have you been doing Beers with Blois?
Started right after the 2018 election. So I think it launched in first quarter of 2019. So 2 years. And the premise was that after 2016, we covered, between CCO and Morning Take, the governor's race of 2018 very, very closely. And again, it was a big growth year, both on online and on radio content. And so CCO was like, you should do a podcast. And I said, well, I don't really have time, and I don't know what I do yet. And so I kind of waited for the dust to settle. And then the premise was, it's called Beers with Blois. And the premise was, nobody sits down and talks about politics over a beer. They tweet at each other. They yell at each other, especially in the era of Trump. Civility had gone out the door. So I was like, can we just sit down, have a beer, and talk politics like normal people, or how normal people would talk about these things? And, the governor kicked off the first episode. Then there were like, now, I mean, I get requests from people. When do I get to be on Beers with Blois? And it's like, well, it's got to be timely. And some of the most interesting ones were last summer, we did a 2 or 3 part series where we had a Democrat and Republican on rather than just one person, and found some commonalities. And we weren't going to save democracy or save the election civility with that. But you could really see Greater Minnesota and urban Democrats, Republicans, they have these conversations, and that's what people don't see because they see cable news or they see Twitter or they see, news clips of just people pissing on each other all the time. And I wanted to show that that's not necessarily the case.
So how do people subscribe to your podcast? Where can they find it?
They can go to any of your podcast platforms, from Apple to Stitcher to Google, or to WCCOradio.com and the Odyssey app, and they can sign up right there. It's called Beers with Blois. If you search it, you'll find it, because my name being Blois helps in my search results. I'll just say that, David. I know you profess much ambition in helping people with search, but I will tell you that this is I've learned over the years that for good and bad, Blois is just a good name that Google keeps finding.
Yep, it's a Blois card. You can play that every time.
There you go.
How do people subscribe to your newsletters? We should make sure we say that.
They go to fluence-newsletters.com and they can sign up for any of them there. And if you like the interface, praise David, and if you don't, criticize me because I approved it.
Let's talk about Fluence Media. So Fluence Media is your company. Tell me, what does Fluence Media do?
We're actually two separate entities now. In 2021, there's Fluence Media and then there's Fluence Advisory. And advisory is the consulting side of the business. So high stakes communication, C-level communication, crisis management, for trade associations, businesses, regulated industries. As you know, I built and grew a firm and sold it a long time ago. That was one thing. And then, what I heard from my clients was, we really like an agency, but we really want deep strategy from you. And so Fluence Media is now 9 years old. In July it will be. And so that's where it is. It's not a big staff. This is a small firm, and it's executive led communications from myself and a few other contractors. But you can see me sitting in my home office, and that's not because of COVID. It's because this is where I've been since we started the company. And I like it like that.
You were all set for COVID. So was I.
Yes, we both were. Yeah. Although I will say that COVID has made, I think, both of us way more efficient in content development and production. And I was commenting to somebody for multiple reasons, but just because I like tech toys, but also, whether it's this microphone that now sits here or whatever, we just, the ability to, again, yes, it costs money, but relative to other industries, the cost of having a home studio for you and I to record this is minimal. Yeah. Not to mention, we didn't really know what Zoom was before. Right. And now I couldn't live without it. And in fact, don't ask me to travel a half hour each way to a meeting if we can cover it half hour or 45 minutes here. And those weekly conference calls where people were faceless or whatever now move to Zoom. And I have no endorsement deals with Zoom. Let's be clear, but I'm a shareholder. So if they want to give me one, I'll take one. But if you look at the cost of Zoom, the cost of Zoom is lower in an unlimited basis than my previous conference call service that charged me by the minute just a year ago.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. How the world changes so quickly.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Blois. This has been fun. I appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll have to do it again. When you launch your next venture, we'll talk again.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Take care.
All right. See you, David.
Bye.